This Week in Startups is brought to you by BetterHelp, providing access to easy, affordable, and private professional counseling anytime, anywhere. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/twist. That's betterhelp.com/twist. Send Pro Online from Pitney Bowes. Save time and money no matter what you ship or mail. Try it free for 30 days and get a free 10-pound scale when you visit pb.com/twist. And NetSuite by Oracle, the business management software that handles every aspect of your business in an easy-to-use cloud platform. Schedule a free product tour and receive your free guide, 6 ways to run a more profitable business at netsuite.com/twist.
The technology industry is fickle. Every time we see some great new technology, it takes multiple waves for it to actually stick and become a technology that becomes part of the fabric of industry or consumers' daily lives. Look at electric cars. 100 years ago, cars started as electric. We then had electric cars 20 years ago, and it took multiple waves of founders and entrepreneurs to figure out how to make electric cars actually stick. Look at VR. We had the Game Boy glove and all these different VR headsets over time. We've been talking about it since the 80s. And now Oculus comes out, gets bought by Facebook, and still nobody's using them. We're still waiting for that wave to actually stick with consumers. Technology's there, consumers are not. Cryptocurrency, another perfect example. In the 90s, we had eCash as a concept before the term cryptocurrency. Then we had a crypto bubble over the last couple of years, and now everybody's down on it. It's in the trough. And we'll see if anything comes out of the crypto smoking pile of burning garbage. Maybe there's an Amazon in there. Maybe there's not. Maybe we'll take another 10, 20, 30 years. One of those spaces that we all wondered about was 3D printing. When we saw 3D printing, the ability to make something essentially in the physical real world in 3D, we all thought, wow, this is crazy. It's like the replicator from Star Trek. And we saw a bunch of companies and a bunch of hobbyists start using them, and then it kind of fizzled out. You didn't hear about it anymore. Well, one of the leaders of the 3D printing space, Max Lobovsky. No, let's get it right. Lobovsky. Got it. Well, welcome to the pod, Max. You co-founded and you're the CEO of Formlabs. You've been doing this for a decade almost.
8 years, yeah.
8 years. Yeah, getting there. And you're now making over $100 million in revenue making 3D printers. You heard my little preamble there about how hard it is to have a new technology stick. With $100 million in revenues, it's obviously sticking now. But people have forgotten about it, and you lived through the hype cycle. MakerBot, I guess, got bought for some large amount of money. Was it $1 billion?
About $500 million.
$500 million. I think that was like a watershed moment.
That was a big day in 3D printing.
Big day in 3D printing. But $100 million cannot be faked. What are people paying you for? The printers, the ink, what? What is your business?
So we sell the printers. We also sell the materials that they use, and then some services. But the core of what we deliver is a complete system, a printer that can fit on your tabletop, that can basically take any 3D design, any CAD model you might have on your computer, and produce it in a range of different materials, and we supply those materials for you.
So you sell the printers, you sell the materials, and there were supposed to be these other two businesses that would emerge. One of them was like a marketplace, right? Or the other was software, or enterprise software. But I guess what I have to ask you is, when I first saw this, these were nerds and geeks who were printing Christmas ornaments or little trinkets that had no value in the actual real world other than the fact that they were magically created. And it was fascinating, but they really had no value. Who's buying these printers, and what are they printing, and what value do those things create in the universe? Is it still hobbyists making trinkets and telling you they can make you an ornament for your Christmas tree?
There's a hobbyist segment, and it emerged about 10 years ago. And that's a lot of what sort of triggered this wave of hype in 3D printing, because people thought, okay, now, it was used by industry before. Now there's some sort of, looks like consumer usage, and maybe there'll be a mass consumer product.
Did that happen? Is there a mass?
That didn't happen.
Why do you think it didn't happen?
It didn't happen because a 3D printer doesn't do enough yet to make sense as a home product.
Got it.
That I think the concept of a 3D printer is it can take, it can create any 3D thing, any physical object you might want. And the reality of a 3D printer is that it can make a lot of different objects, but not any, and it fits in a certain size and made out of certain materials. And then there's also some skill still involved in running them. So all these things sort of put up barriers where the number of things you might want to make with it at home, it's not quite there.
So the friction, if I'm unpacking this, is it's still a little bit complicated. A decade or so into this, we're maybe in the second decade?
Well, so we're actually closer to 4 decades into 3D printing.
Well, I'm talking about the second decade of consumers playing with it. Like, when did consumers start having their first ones? It was the mid-2000s?
Mid-late 2000s. So
2007, 8.
I guess I could give you the full history. It started in the 80s, and for most of the history of 3D printing, it's been $100,000 and up, refrigerator-sized piece of capital equipment. Mm-hmm. Any big company that's doing some kind of product design, whether it's Ford or Boeing or Apple, has been using them since at least the early 90s. And then they kind of got better, industry slowly grew, and then getting to the late 2000s, people started to make these desktop home printers. And
came under 25K, under 20K, then under 10.
Well, even $1,000 kits of parts that people were assembling. Right. The thing that really kicked it off was this open source project called RepRap. RepRap, yeah, which stands for
R-I?
R-E-P-R-A-P.
RepRap.
Yeah.
And what is it?
I think it's supposed to stand for Replicating Rapid Prototyper or something. The idea was it was a cheap one that would also be able to print all of its own parts, so it would self-replicate.
Yeah, this is basically the Skynet of 3D printers, which made geeks go even more insane for this. They were like, oh my God, I can buy a 3D printer and print a 3D printer. Exactly. It's like Inception of printers.
It is Inception of printers and is an awesome, powerful idea. And I think there's some value to that long term, but the reality is you can print a small portion of a 3D printer.
I want to get back to the friction you mentioned earlier. One is too complicated. So it's much less complicated now. There's a lot of software out there for 3D models. There's a lot of things you can download off the internet. If you wanted a Darth Vader helmet, I'm sure you could go on the dark web somewhere and find a little model, even though Star Wars maybe didn't license it properly, but somebody's made a 3D model. I want to get into that too as well. Like, if I'm doing a clay, I might as well get into it right now. If I was making like a clay non-commercial piece of pottery and I wanted to make a Boba Fett helmet or something, like, Star Wars is not going to come down on me. But if you made a
Disney
Boba
has
Fett...
been fairly aggressive.
But this is what I heard. But if you make a Boba Fett helmet and put it on a 3D printing site, they're going to come rain hell on you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of new or kind of less well-trodden legal territory being uncovered with the 3D content because, there's certainly laws that govern this kind of IP, but... it's not been really as tested or as enforced when it comes to 3D models, and so there's some new ground being broken there.
But the
reality is, people use 3D printers. The bulk of the industry is still professionals,
right?
And
but was that part of what killed the hobbyist thing? Was that you couldn't really do fun IP on it? Or was like underground?
I don't think so. I think
just the friction.
It's a successful niche in the hobby market. It's a several $100 million of hobby business.
I would just think that if Disney made one of these printers and said, every month we're going to let you print out a new character from the Star Wars, you buy a subscription for whatever, $20 a month, you can print out the collectibles, and we're only going to allow 10,000 to be printed each time. Did anybody ever try that kind of nonsense?
Some companies started going down that path. MakerBot did, I think, get into some of sort of consumer brand partnerships. But again, I think the printers weren't and still aren't producing enough range of things. Like, you can get a coarse plastic model that looks like something.
Okay, so that was my follow-up to your friction thing. What is it with the materials that limits it today? I'm an investor in a company called Desktop Metal. They do metal, which is really expensive and crazy. But on the consumer side, what is the limitation of the materials now?
For
the consumer, you mentioned that was you could only make certain things because the printer was only able to print certain materials. It's printing plastic now, right?
Yeah.
It's a resin or something in little spools of string.
That's one type of 3D printing. That's typically called fused deposition modeling, where you extrude a little string of plastic. We actually do a different process called stereolithography, which uses liquid resin and lasers to build up a part, and we can make much higher resolution, much more high detailed parts. But to answer about the materials, we're working in plastics. There's a huge range of plastics. If you look around this room, there's strong and stiff plastics, there's stretchy plastics, there's temperature-resistant ones, and all kinds of
flexible for cables, all kinds of stuff.
and all kinds of different properties there. And the range of plastics that all these things in this room are made out of is huge. There's like hundreds of thousands of them commercially available. In 3D printing, it's a much smaller set of maybe hundreds, and they're often not quite as good. So you're often trying to like meet something. And so that's a big part of what we do, is we're trying to advance materials technology as well, improve the materials properties to get closer to all the things you might want to make.
So the hobbyist is 10%, 20% of your business? 50%?
Of our business, it's more like 5% or less.
What's the other 95%? I'm assuming it's professional.
Yeah.
And I always hear about like this, when I would be pitched on this 10 years ago as an angel investor, I would get pitched like, BMW's got to print a part, or this person, Tesla's got to build a new dashboard, so they're going to 3D print it. Is that actually the business? It's like prototyping?
It's a crazy huge range. So prototyping and product development is one big chunk. That's been part of 3D printing for a while. We've got basically name a Fortune 500 company that makes stuff, and they're using our printers. Apple,
for prototypes?
For short run sort of beta testing.
Even for beta testing?
For jigs and fixtures and tooling. So parts that are made that go into their factory to make the final product.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, they have to make something to make something.
Yeah.
They use a 3D printer.
Yeah, so like Tesla, Elon Musk talks about the machine that makes the machine,
right?
Designing the factories that make. And so as for every part that's in the car, there's actually usually several more parts that were designed to make each one of those parts. Sure. And that you see a lot of 3D printing in things like that.
Got it.
So that's like one really big chunk we call kind of engineering and manufacturing. But then it goes all over the place from there. Next really big chunk for us is dental.
I'm sorry. I thought you said dental. It's my bad ear.
Dental.
People are 3D printing.
People are 3D printing
teeth.
Dentures. People are 3D printing crowns.
What?
People are 3D printing night guards. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So that whole thing where you have to wait 3 weeks for them to send that gooey mold that you put your teeth in.
Yeah.
They're going to be able to print it in their office.
Now can be done totally digitally. So whether you're printing it in the office or not, you're at least cutting out that goo step, and you're using...
and here's a picture of it. We have a picture of model resin.
So this is a few of the different dental applications we have. These are models that you'd use to test fit some other parts, but we'll get to some of the more interesting applications. This is a surgical guide. So that clear part is actually used during a procedure to guide a drill into your jaw.
Is that when you're getting like an
implant
or an implant?
Yeah. So normally, without a guide, the dentist is actually freehand drilling into your jaw and hopefully getting the hole in the right place. But with a drill guide, it's
so much better.
There's a night guard.
How did you? What I want to ask you when we get back from this quick break is, when you started the company, did you even know that this application would emerge, or when did you discover that dental could be a big part of this? When we get back on This Week in Startups. Would you hesitate to go to the doctor if you had a broken arm? Of course not. Well, your mental health deserves the same attention. BetterHelp is the world's largest counseling service for improving your mental health. BetterHelp will help you assess what your needs are, match you with a counselor from their network of licensed, accredited, and board-certified therapists, and start your communication with that therapist in under 24 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional counseling done securely online. How convenient. With BetterHelp, you can access a counselor network with a broad range of expertise. So they have people who know how to deal with entrepreneurs or maybe family issues. You get the idea. And avoid the 9 to 5 of traditional therapy and message your counselor anytime. A lot of the reasons people don't go to therapy is because it's too inconvenient. They can't get off from work. The time is hard to get on the schedule. Here, you're doing it remote. You're doing it over your device. And so you're going to be able to do it on your schedule. You can easily change counselors if needed for free. And you can schedule a video or phone session with your personal counselor. It is so easy to do. But I went through the process just to see what it's like, and it is amazing how efficient and elegant this product is. It's worth checking out. You'll never have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room again, wondering if one of your friends is going to walk in. Instead, you're going to get therapy from the comfort of your own home for less than a traditional counselor cost. It's more efficient, it's faster, and it's even more affordable. BetterHelp's mission is to provide everyone with easy, affordable, and private access to professional counseling anytime, anywhere. So get started today. This Week in Startups listeners will get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/twist, or use the code TWIST, TWIST, at checkout. That's betterhelp.com/twist to get 10% off your first month. Thanks again to BetterHelp for supporting independent media like This Week in Startups and for helping people. All right, welcome back to This Week in Startups. If you love the podcast, just keep listening to it. I'm not going to beg you for reviews or any nonsense. Like, listen, we're 1,000 episodes in. If you haven't written a review by now, you're probably not going to write a review on iTunes. So I'm not going to sit here and pander to you and beg you to write one. But if you do write one, that's really nice. Our guest today, Max, is the CEO and co-founder of Formlabs. Formlabs started in 2011, doing over $100 million in revenue. You got 500 people working at this company. A lot of them in China?
A few in China. Mostly in Boston, and then a bunch of other places around the world.
You make the machines in China or in the United States?
We make the latest generation in China.
What's this coronavirus doing to your business? Anything?
It's definitely not great.
How so?
It's definitely hurt our supply chains, and we've got kind of reduced production, and then we've got new products we're trying to ramp up in China that are also slowed down.
So this is a real thing. When you have a business disruption like this, your factories are where? Not in Wuhan.
In Guangdong, Shenzhen area.
Shenzhen area, yeah. So even there, people were told to stay home for some period of time. There's nobody at the factory, so basically production stopped.
Yeah.
So you got to sell what's in inventory. And then the state of the art of running a hardware company like this at scale is to have just-in-time manufacturing. Is that right?
Yeah, you generally don't want to have a huge stock at any time, so you're not usually you don't usually have weeks and weeks of printers left in your warehouse at any time.
So you can literally just keep a week or two of inventory and know that they're just going to be constantly trickling out from China?
We're not usually able to run things that close to the wire, but bigger companies can sometimes do that.
Isn't that incredible when you think about it? We're making stuff around the world, and when the iPhone comes out, they're delivering it and packaging it directly in China to go to American consumers. And
in days,
and they get made there, and then they're here in people's hands in the same week.
Well, and the crazy thing is that to get to that iPhone, you're probably just thinking about that final assembly, but there's parts in that iPhone that have been in production for 6 months or more, chips and things like that, and they're all kind of coming through the supply chain from all around the world, meeting in one place, getting put in product, getting to a store and in someone's hands.
Yeah, this is what I understand, like Elon at Tesla's and SpaceX really opposed to, and one of his big strengths of those companies is that they make a lot of the stuff. They're like relying on a supplier. Why don't we just get a printer ourselves and make this ourselves, so we're not reliant on everybody? And so on the second floor, we can have the mount for the iPad in the Tesla Model 3 can just be taken and printed there.
Yeah, and we've had to do a lot of similar vertical integration where we make a lot of the specialty optics components. We design them ourselves, things like lasers and these special electric motors called galvanometers. And that's a lot of how we make our printers 10 times cheaper than what printers used to cost.
Let's get a candid question. When something like this happens and we start to realize, okay, this could be a new normal, like every year or every 5 years, whatever, could be something that becomes a regular occurrence. And given how expensive China is getting, it's getting more expensive, I understand. Have you had a discussion internally or even just yourself considered, I wonder if I should just make these in America like Elon's making rockets and cars in America? Have you thought about insourcing it back here?
We definitely constantly think about where to make our printer, also where to make the different components in it. We made our first product actually in the US, in California, the second generation in Hungary, in Europe, and then the third generation in China. So as things change, it evolves, and I think, and then we actually make the materials that the printers use, we make those in the U.S. in our own facility that we own in Ohio.
Really? In Ohio?
Yeah, so we own a chemical plant in Ohio, which is very high on the list of things I had no idea I would do 10 years ago.
A chemical plant?
Yeah.
Did you buy somebody else's chemical plant?
Yeah, we were working with a supplier to make our materials, and we became a bigger part of the business, and the relationship was really good, so we acquired them.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Go full stack. Hey, when we left for the break, I wanted to ask you about, and it circles back to the introduction where I talked about the false starts of new technologies, cutting-edge technologies, obviously 3D printing starting in the 80s as you educated us with 100,000 six-figure units. And to now, when you started the company, did you have any idea in your mind that dental would become some portion of this?
We knew that dental was an important segment for 3D printers, and specifically our type of high-resolution printers.
You did know that?
We knew that, but we didn't
Were people doing it at the time, or?
They were doing it, but the problem is with those expensive machines with a limited set of materials, it took decades for like any commercial applications to happen, and there were only like a couple companies that had made it work. But since we started, because the printers we've made them far more affordable, they're far more widely available, as well as the software and 3D scanning technology, which other companies provide, that's developed a lot. So now a lot more stuff is happening in dental. Many, dentists, dental labs are making things with it.
What skill set is needed to operate in a vertical? What individual do you need? Do you need somebody who's a 3D CAD modeler? Do you need somebody who's just got a basic Photoshop level,
to
knowledge?
Actually run a job, if you've got a model you want to print and you want to send it to the printer, that's quite simple. Pretty much any,
If you can use Amazon, you can use that.
Not quite that good, but it's pretty close. You
Excel.
can take most people can take most people can take the printer out of the box and start a print in 15-20 minutes.
Got it.
But
what about that next level up when you have to make something custom?
So what most of our customers want to do is they're making their own design. And,
right.
They're making either a denture for somebody or they're making a prototype of product. Then you start to want to learn how the printer works to be able to take advantage of its capabilities.
What degree or skill do you need to do that? And what, if you were putting a job description out for a 3D printer modeler, what would the job description say? The title?
It could be a mechanical engineer.
So that's sophisticated, yeah.
That would be the most typical thing, but there's so many types of people using it. There's again dentists who are
literally dentists are learning how to do CAD drawings.
Yeah, there's kind of specialized dental CAD that literally lets them move teeth around and do things like that.
There's dental CAD?
Yeah.
What's it called?
One company is called 3Shape that makes it. Yeah.
Does that go on top of some other software, or is there some industry standard 3D software that people?
No, it's
what are the
really
top 2 or 3
fragmented.
pieces of software?
There's different CAD for every type of market. So there's like mechanical CAD, dental CAD, movie and entertainment industry CAD.
You're kidding! I had no idea.
We take models from all of those different software for different applications.
What is the standard for a model? Like, what's the PDF or the JPEG of?
It's called an STL.
STL.
Yeah.
And you just feed it in STL and it makes it.
Yeah. We take STLs from all the software, and then we have to have a lot of intelligence on our side of software to be able to deal with each one of those types of software kind of doesn't output great STLs, so we have to process that.
Yeah, and you also have to know if the person has made something that the printer's capable of printing.
Yeah, and that's actually a huge part of our innovation is in exactly that. Typically, before we got started, you'd have mechanical engineer type person who's trained on using a printer, who looks at what you're trying to print, figures out how to orient it. Is it going to print it this way or that way? Adds support structures that hold up the part and sort of designs a process for that printer to print that part. We had to automate all of that if we want, because making the printers cheaper doesn't necessarily make them more accessible if they're just as difficult to use. Right. That was part of what that hobbyist movement sort of missed, is the printers got cheaper, but they were still really difficult to use. Right. So we've also made them more accessible, and that it hasn't made them a consumer product yet, but it's gotten them to way more professionals and way more industries.
Here's a stupid question. I've also been pitched on businesses or seen them at like demo days where they say, we make the machine, the cameras that will take this cup, do a bunch of cameras in a circle around it. I don't know what they call that. And
photogrammetry.
Grammetry?
Photogrammetry.
Photogrammetry.
Yeah, it's when you take a lot of photos and reconstruct a 3D model from
Got it. Do you make that device as well? Who makes that device? How much does that device cost?
There's software you can literally use on your phone to do photogrammetry. It's, you get mixed results, but
so you just literally walk around
an object. Yeah,
you put it on a pedestal and you walk around it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, there's like this ecosystem of CAD software, 3D scanning technology, and so different companies are working on different parts of that, and we have to kind of work with all those companies.
So we're getting to the point where somebody would be able to put a part for, this is the other one I would get. It's like you're on a desert island or you're on Mars and something breaks. So instead of bringing, to your Mars colony 10 different backups of every single part, you just bring one 3D printer, and then you put the part into the 3D printer. If you hadn't already made a model of it, it just takes a picture of it and makes it. How far away from that?
NASA's actually launched a 3D printer to the International Space Station already, and they've done some experiments with that. They've printed some parts out, so it's getting there. Yeah, the bigger part that's honestly missing from making something like that happen is you want to design those parts for 3D printing. It's hard to take something you made with a different process and then just translate to 3D printing and get the same result. But if you designed your Mars colony with everything designed to be 3D printed, then that's pretty much a reality today.
Oh, wow. So is there an application on planet Earth that does that? Where you're like, it's hard to get here. It's the North Pole. And we're going to build our base station in Antarctica or the Arctic and say everything's 3D printed. Send a 3D printer, a bunch of spools or whatever, resins. What do you call the resins you do?
We call them resin, yeah.
Yeah, resin. Okay, wow, it's a technical term for resin. But it's not in a spool.
It's in a liquid. It's kind of in this black cartridge.
Really? Show it. I want to see it. I didn't know they were in the goo. So this is sort of like Prometheus, right? The goo from Aliens?
Yeah, I mean,
that's what you make in Ohio?
Looks...
it does look like the goo from Prometheus?
It does look like the goo from Prometheus. I'll show you...
And just as a total aside, Max, how great is Prometheus as a science fiction film? It's so underrated, correct?
It is great. It is underrated. I love...
You've seen it... I'm going to set the over-under at 3.5. You've seen it more than 3 times or 4 times. How many times have you seen Prometheus?
At least twice. Yeah, maybe 3.
Yeah. It's so good. It's like Gladiator or Goodfellas when you're changing channels and you hit on Prometheus.
The android,
you're going to watch it to the end.
Fassbender as an android. He's already kind of an...
Fassbender's amazing.
He's already an android, and so it works perfectly.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's the android of actors. I'm sure he would appreciate that.
Yeah.
Unlike Christian Bale. No. Here we go. Look at this printer. So here's the pinpoint. Look at that lattice work there. That looks like the Eiffel Tower or something.
Yeah, you can make really fine structures with this process. So this is what's inside the machine. There's this laser, we call it the LPU, light processing unit, that scans the laser back and forth, and then it comes into the bottom of a liquid tank of resin, and the part actually emerges vertically.
From that resin.
Yeah, T1000 style.
Yeah, T1000, right, like a Terminator. And what are your 3D printers start at now? What's the range of cost?
Starts at about $3,500.
Cheap.
Yeah.
And that's for an industrial one, or that's more like consumer? Prosumer?
That's our flagship product. That's bought by professionals in all these industries.
No, it used to be that the spools were really expensive. If you wanted to build like a let's just call it like a grapefruit-sized object. How much plastic resin? I know it depends on the density, but just ballpark. Is it $1 to $10 to print something in plastic, or is it $50 to print something in plastic?
This size part might be $10 a resin. We charge $150 per liter, so depends how big your part is.
Right, and how dense it is, right?
Yeah. Typically, you're not making like solid. You don't make a sphere. A solid sphere.
When we get back from this quick break, I want to know what you think of these the large-scale 3D printers, the ones that can print a house or a car frame or something that's that large size. And if you think that those are going to have any impact on society, because when I look at those 3D printed houses, I see a prison cell, not a house. They're made out of cement. But I'm wondering if you, since you're so visionary in this space, see a time when, a small shed in your backyard or a bicycle or a sled will be printed with a 3D printer when we get back on This Week in Startups. Shipping can be complex. We all know that. And with the uncertainty over costs and deciding which carrier to use, plus going and tracking your packages, things can get confusing quick. Well, with SendPro Online, it's easy to save time and money no matter where you send from letters to packages to overnights and flats. Easily compare USPS, UPS, and FedEx in an all-in-one online tool. Print shipping labels and stamps from your own printer and track all of your shipments and get email notifications when they've arrived. Plus, when the USPS postal rates increased on January 27th, you'll still be able to access savings of up to 40% off USPS priority mail shipping and 5 cents off every letter you send just by using SendPro Online. So here is your call to action. SendPro Online is only $14.99 a month, and listeners can get a free 30-day trial when you visit pb.com/twist. pb.com/twist. You'll also receive a free 10-pound scale to help you weigh your packages and accurately calculate the cost of shipping so you'll never overpay. I do that all the time. I'm putting too many stamps on things because I don't have that scale until I went to pb.com/twist. That's pb.com/twist. Experience the convenience of SendPro Online for yourself when you sign up for that free 30-day trial. We have it here. We use it. We love it. It works. I send people copies of my book all the time. We save a ton of money, which is important. You're on a budget. You want to make sure you're frugal. Go ahead and go to pb.com/twist. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode. Welcome back to This Week in Science Fiction. Max is the co-founder and CEO of Formlabs. 500 people working there. You based in Boston?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you're based too? You're in Boston?
Yeah.
Wow. Has it always
Cambridge.
been there?
Yeah, we got started there. It was me and 2 other MIT graduates, and so we kind of started down the street in a little co-working space.
Who were the first investors? How did you get that first seed round done?
That's actually a really good story.
So I'm asking. Whoever they are, they're pretty stoked right now to be investors in this company.
I hope they are. We were going through the grueling pitching dozens and dozens of investors over a period of months, struggling to get any traction. This was especially in 2011. This was not like a
right
hot
after the
field.
financial crisis and right after Maker was sold whatever number of years earlier.
MakerBot sold several years after that.
Oh, sorry. They started a couple of years before that, right?
Yeah, they started a couple of years before that. But there was very little investment in this sort of hardware company. So we were struggling to get everyone, came and saw a demo of the printer working. They said, "That's awesome. You guys seem really smart. I have no idea what this even is or how to invest in it or anything like that."
That's the problem with making something new. When it's that new, it gets people excited, but it also scares them from writing a check.
Yeah.
So what maniac gave you that first check and for how much?
So we were on literally the 50th investor meeting, something like that, over dinner at Legal Seafood in Harvard Square.
Yeah.
And going
through the same lobster roll, getting a little crab Louie.
Yeah, clam chowder.
Oh, nice.
And probably going through the same pitch. And we got to the end of the dinner. We knew we had done this enough times to know this one wasn't going anywhere. Yeah. And went back to the apartment that me and my co-founder David Craner were living in, and he got an email from a friend of ours with a retweet of an original tweet, the original tweet from @mcaper. And, clicked on it and saw that, that's Mitch Caper. We vaguely, know who he is. And the original tweet says, on the patio at Legal Seafoods in Harvard Square, overhearing 2 entrepreneurs pitching 3D printing. Anyone interested or something like that.
Whoa.
And
this is a great story.
And we're like, wow, that...
Mitch Capor, of course, the founder of Lotus 123.
Yeah, founder of Lotus Software. And I think what's really relevant for the story, he was part of the PC revolution. He was part of taking mainframe expensive technology and making it accessible, part of making killer apps for businesses. Yep. So there's actually big parallel.
When it was pretty muddy, people were like, we can buy a $5,000 PC. Now what do we do with it?
Exactly.
It was the same hobbyist thing.
So, I being a pessimistic, skeptical engineer, was just laughed about it and said, okay, whatever. But luckily, David is a much more opportunistic guy, and he said, let's email him.
Yeah, slide into the DMs. Let's go.
Yeah, and so he found his email address, sent him an email, and
Mitch sends you a check.
That was us.
Mitch and Freda sent you a check.
Actually, first he wrote back. He wrote back somehow in the middle of the night. I guess he was on California time or something like that, and he said,
or he's a winner.
Could be.
I mean, let's be honest. people who email back quickly and take decisive action are winners. And people who disappear for 3 or 4 days, they generally don't win as much.
That might be me, so I don't know.
You disappear for 4 days and don't check your email for opportunities?
I check it, but I can be slow to respond, yeah.
Oh.
I like to think about things.
Really? Well, see, if you're an investor, you got to respond quick.
Yeah, I don't.
You got to seize the day.
I don't think I'd be a good early stage investor.
No, probably not.
So he wrote back right away.
Snooze, you lose.
Actually, he wrote back right away and said, sounds interesting, but I know nothing about this, so I won't invest. So that was his quick response.
That's his quick no.
Yeah.
Now, did you take it as a no or an opportunity
he said,
get a yes?
Let's talk next time I'm in town. And next time he was in Boston to receive his star on the Kendall Square tech walk of fame.
Oh, is there such a thing?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah, they're putting that up for me in Brooklyn. Yeah, down on Shore Road. It's like 3 famous people from Brooklyn. Yeah, Steven Seagal, me, Ricky Schroeder.
So he came by our office and he listened to the story, and by the end of it, to paraphrase incorrectly, Mitch was like, this is just like it was when we were inventing the PC, and I want to get involved. Yep. And
all of a sudden, you got a Hyundai 250. He usually puts in a little 250.
Yeah, I think it was 300,000 that he put in.
Yeah, I know my investors.
And then at about the same time, Joey Ito, who was joining MIT as director of the Media Lab,
right?
Where we came out of.
You were in the Media Lab.
Yeah.
Tell people what the Media Lab is and why people are so enamored with it, why you chose it to spend 2 or 3 years of your life.
The Media Lab is a really interesting, unusual place. I don't really
Unusual is a good one, yeah.
I don't really know any other place like it in the world. So it's a kind of a research department at MIT that has 20, 30 professors and 150 grad students. And what's unusual about it, one, super cross-disciplinary research. There's everything from biotech to robots making music and everything in between, 3D printing. And another thing that's really unusual about it is a good chunk of the funding comes from this sort of corporate sponsorship model where it's been called a country club for tech companies.
They each put $1 million, $2 million, $5 million in, and that's the budget.
Yeah, and then they put it in without a lot of constraints, and then the Media Lab sort of distributes it amongst its professors. So there's a lot more flexibility, a lot more open-ended research. It's generally centered around human-computer interaction, but really broad. Yeah. Amazing tools, amazing smart people.
It's just fun to walk around the lab. I've been there many times where you just walk around, meet students, and they're working on their projects, and that's what the big Microsofts or Cisco's or whoever's writing checks do.
Yeah.
They walk around, they get inspiration. They don't have ownership in the projects, but they get to meet you early.
Yep, they get to meet you early. They have some kind of IP license, but that's really, they just want to be there.
Yeah. So you were working on the 3D printing there?
Not really.
Oh.
I was working on...
What was your project?
I was in a part of the Media Lab called the Center for Bits and Atoms, which is sort of a hard tech group there.
I'm sure that was Nicholas Negroponte's thing, because his whole book, Being Digital, was the seminal book. I don't know if you remember this, you're a little younger, but back in 94 or 5, he wrote a book called Being Digital, and it was basically the book you handed to people who didn't understand what the internet was or what the possibility was here, and he just explained that atoms were going to be turned into bits, and that music was going to go from a record to being bits, and books would be bits. Stuff we take for advantage now. Photos would be bits. Movies would be bits, and you could move them.
The professor I worked with, Neil Gershenfeld, he was kind of one of the early professors in the Media Lab who had really pushed that. His kind of whole research group is around bits being more like atoms and atoms being more like bits, using things we learn from computation to change how we make things. So that's what 3D printing is, and also vice versa, making computation reflect more how we make things. Anyway, interesting topic. But I worked on
Joey had a fund, so he invested too.
Yeah, he invested too. And with those two guys involved, then they told us to go up on AngelList, which was just
wow.
I was only a year old, I think, at the time.
Yeah, I was the first syndicate. I mean, after Naval, the internal syndicate. I was the first external syndicate. Yeah. Yeah.
So we went up there. At that point, it was just basically like a profile page.
It's there was profile page. It was like LinkedIn.
Yeah. No function to support investing, and people started rolling in after Mitch and Joey were involved, and we ended up with I think 16 different investors. That was mind blowing at the time. I guess around here these days, this is nothing special, but to get
16 investors, pretty cool.
To do like a 45-minute call with some guy in Japan, and then him wire like $100,000 check
Crazy.
later. That I could not believe that that happens.
Yeah, pretty bizarre. And you just raised $15 million at $1 billion valuation, which my math's not always perfect, but I think that's 1% or so, 1.5%. I thought when you hit that unicorn status, you would raise 150 and dilute 10%. Why raise 15 million? Are you Pegasus? You're being super frugal? What's even the point of raising 15 when you're at $1 billion valuation?
We are quite frugal.
Profitable or close?
Most of the money we spend comes from customers. Let's put it like that.
So spitting distance. If you wanted to be profitable, you could?
If we weren't investing as heavily in R&D, we could, yeah.
So back to the question, why raise 15? You're going to go out and raise money. Why not raise 100?
The big reason for that round was actually to get Jeff Immelt, the former CEO of GE, involved in Formlabs. So he's a venture partner at NEA, and a woman named Dana Grayson at NEA. Actually, she's starting her own fund now. She led the round, and Jeff joined the board.
I thought that they were those type of big firms. What you hear on the streets is they need to have 10% ownership. They need to be able to put in $50 million checks or it's not worth it. How do you convince somebody, because NEA's got multiple billions of dollars in their funds, how do you get them to write such a small check and have such a small ownership percentage? Was that an issue? And why do we hear that issue constantly?
Yeah, it's definitely a point you negotiate on. I think they have their business model where they sort of have a target investment, but every company's different, every situation's different, so there's always some flexibility there. And we had just raised $35 million a few months before that, so it's kind of a $50 million round.
So it's a little top off at that valuation. Yeah. And then how do you look at this business now that you're in getting close to that decade? People expect it to go public or have an exit, and you're raising at $1 billion. We just saw Masayoshi-san and SoftBank kind of back off a little bit of like some of these later stage rounds, and people are generally questioning, like, is it a good idea to stay private that long? What kind of advice are you getting in this sort of roller coaster of the industry changing from growth at all costs, go big, stay private, to get profitable? And how do you think about it personally and how you want to live as a founder?
We've always been a very disciplined company that's focused on, again, most of the money we spend coming from customers rather than burning lots of investor capital. That's been true since basically like year one. We launched Kickstarter. We got started end of 2011, and by the end of 2012, we had taken $3 million in pre-orders, and with less than $2 million in equity raised.
Wow.
So we've been selling stuff and trying to build our business, maybe not organically, but trying to build it sort of sustainably from the beginning. And I think that's the right way to do it in this industry. There's certainly if you're building a consumer web thing where scale really matters and network effects really matter, like maybe it makes sense to lose $1 billion before you
turn on advertising and piss everybody off.
And I think one of the really big mistakes that's happened in venture capital in the last couple of years is that people have assumed that model could be applied to a lot of other industries where it just doesn't work, and you end up all that money you burn doesn't actually get you some value that stays. Like, it might have helped drive some revenue, but not in a very sticky, sustainable way. Yeah,
investing to have 1 billion people on Facebook or 100 million people using Snapchat, we pretty much know how the advertising world works. You can pretty much model it. But if you're doing something new like Uber or Lyft or DoorDash and Uber Eats or whatever it is, do we know that losing all this money makes sense or not? And the public market seems to think not.
Subsidizing rides for years and years and years, it's unclear what value is left today. Whereas for us, when the money that we're losing is primarily going into investing more heavily in R&D, and after a few years of R&D, we have a very clear thing left over, which is a
Yes.
product that we're selling,
Right.
which is better than what exists out there. So I think we try to stay disciplined. We don't try to lose, when we're selling in terms of sales and marketing activities, we make sure we don't lose money there because that just doesn't make sense.
And then how do you think about from this point forward? Because that's the big question today. Should you go public? Should you stay private? And you're kind of at that point where it used to be when you hit 25, 50 million in revenue, you went public, you're over 100 million in revenue now. Are you feeling pressure to go public or exit because you got Boston-based company, like they're not used to $100 billion companies? They probably very much would appreciate a quick billion to $5 billion exit.
You're right. A lot of Boston investors are not used to that sort of thing, which is probably why we have very few Boston investors.
Exactly. No offense to Boston investors, but they are scared.
There are a few great ones there.
But they're scared. A lot of them are scared.
Yeah.
All downside protection.
Yeah, and so we have ended up with more Bay Area investors. So how
do you think about that?
Yeah,
I think file, or you think you're going to just stay private for a little
For me,
longer?
in terms of like my personal goals, and I think also reflect what most of the people at the company are interested in, going public or staying private is sort of orthogonal to the goal. The goal is build more awesome stuff and get it to lots of people and make an impact with that.
Right.
And do that at a bigger scale, make more products, get them to more people, and keep going there.
You get the reality of the board pressuring you a bit, like, hey, we got to do something.
So the good thing is we do have these really long-term focused investors.
There's
not a huge pressure there. As long as we're growing and making progress, then they have the ability to wait. And I think board and investors are aligned that going public has to make sense for the company. Doing it too early, it's a huge overhead and a huge distraction. If a company can't show kind of really regular, predictable revenue and earnings.
You feel you have predictable revenue now, or is the industry still emerging and you're still figuring it out?
I think we shouldn't be going public today.
Yeah.
That's
it goes back to the sort of opening of the show when I was talking about, hey, how predictable is it? You're still in that point of time where maybe dental's the entire business. Maybe there's an entire business just on dental globally, and that's a hard decision for you to make as a founder who loves 3D printing, right? Like if you're just going for the IPO, then logic might say, just pick the one vertical that works best and ignore everything else and just be a dental company.
And I think a lot of our success has been actually avoiding that trend. That's a lot of the advice we've received. A lot of the sort of like classic advice for a B2B company is sort of to pick one vertical and focus on and specialize in it. And that, I think, is how a lot of the existing 3D printing companies have been built up. They're not always just focused on one vertical, but they sort of align their products and their go-to-market and everything around that. And they've missed the opportunity to do this broad-based investment in one technology platform where if we actually put, even though we are not one of the bigger companies in the industry, we put more R&D into a single printer model than anyone else. And that's part of how we deliver much more printer per dollar than anyone else. It's sort of, Apple is kind of the best example of this, where they have less SKUs than companies with far less revenue than them.
Yeah.
And so they get to invest so much in making every single product they make the best by far.
Yeah. When you look at AirPods, it's like there's 100 knockoffs on Amazon right now. And just in terms of elegance and, what just works, the AirPods work the best. But it is interesting, the knockoffs. When we get back from this final break, I want to talk about winning an Oscar with 3D printing, in part. The large printing thing, I forgot to follow up on that one, printing large things in your driveway. And then how do you think about being in a hardware business? And everybody always talks about, you build something great, it gets knocked off in China. And do you have to protect against that? And are you experiencing that when we get back on This Week in Startups? What do companies like Ring, Hint, and Tecovas have in common? Well, they all use NetSuite to accelerate their growth. Successful companies know that in order to grow faster, you must have the right tools. If you want to take your company from 2 million to 10 million or from 10 million to 100 million in revenue, NetSuite by Oracle gives you the tools to turbocharge your growth. With NetSuite, you'll get the full picture of your business: finance, inventory, human resources, customers, and more. It's everything you need to grow in one place, right from your phone or your computer. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make the right decision and grow with confidence. That's why their customers grow faster than the S&P 500. NetSuite is the world's #1 cloud business system, trusted by more than 19,000 companies. It's also the last system you'll ever need. NetSuite. Business grows here. So here's your call to action. Schedule a free product tour right now and receive your free guide. 6 ways to run a more profitable business at netsuite.com/twist. And you want to run a more profitable business because funding is hard. It's being a little bit of a challenging environment in 2020. So learn how to be more profitable by going to netsuite.com/twist. That's netsuite.com/twist. And thanks for supporting the pod. I really appreciate that. Let's get back to this amazing episode. All right, welcome back to This Week in Startups. Hey, speaking of 3D printing, this is crazy. We're doing our research. Turns out in this movie about Megyn Kelly, what was that called? Bombshell. I got 15 minutes into it and it was just super boring. I haven't finished it. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it.
Yeah. Anyway, so it turns out that somebody 3D printed, if you're watching the pod on youtube.com/thisweekend, or if you go to thisweekindstartups.com and you look at the video, you can see this 3D printed nose implant that goes inside of Charlize Theron's nose. There's her normal nose, which looks perfect. Absolutely, whatever she paid for it's totally worth it. And then here is, maybe it's a natural. Here's Megyn Kelly on the left. No, Megyn Kelly on the right. The real Megyn Kelly's on the right.
It's hard
and her
to
nose,
say which.
It is. Her nose is pointing up a little bit. You can see more of her nostrils. And I guess they did that to Charlize Theron. Charlize. And her nose is pointing up a little bit so you can see her nostrils a little bit. And they did it through 3D printing this. And the person, Kazu, which is Kazu Studios on, I guess, the Instagram, he won for what? Best makeup? Hairstyle and makeup for making her look like that. In part, I think the hair is also, but in part because of this nose implant. And you were wondering if there would be an application. The application is winning Oscars, people.
Yeah, if there's nothing else 3D printers can do, at least they can help win an Oscar.
It's hilarious.
This was really, really funny because I spotted this tweet like a few weeks before the Oscars, and I looked at the part and saw the @Formlabs tag, and it's just such a kind of ridiculous sounding use of our printer. And then a couple weeks later, I was watching the Oscars and saw the guy win, and they like mentioned specifically the nose piece.
What an advantage! I mean, in a way, she kind of cheated. And this might be like a doping scandal, right? Like,
they're probably going to disallow 3D printing from the makeup award after that.
It's too easy to get an Oscar now. If you 3D print it, you got too much edge, right? Yeah. No, I didn't. Who was it? Marlon Brando used to put cotton in his cheeks. I think that's how he did The Godfather.
Yeah.
They said come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding.
Exactly. What if he had 3D printing?
If he had 3D printing, they could have just 3D printed some stuff. He wouldn't have to put a bunch of cotton in his mouth. What about this?
We actually have a lot of customers in Hollywood. We've got like a list of most of the major sort of Marvel action movie type of movies are using our printers.
Oh, really?
In their production.
Makes total sense. If you're building the Iron Man suit, you use Formlabs.
One awesome thing on our website, we've got the Demogorgon from Stranger Things, the big monster with a face that opens up.
Spoiler alert. Sorry, I just ruined it for you. No, we know.
The studio,
you haven't seen it by now.
The studio that designed that used our printers throughout the process, and they made some amazing models.
Just think what this would have done for horror films in the 80s. Like all that Pinhead stuff and whatever, they would have just been 3D modeling all of this stuff. What about these large-scale ones? Everybody's seen, and we can pull one up here, 3D printing of houses with cement. Barely feels like 3D printing to me. It feels like just cement being done in a square. How large have your printers gotten? And, we're sitting here at a table that's whatever, 5x5. You think you're going to have these like 5x5, 10x10 printers? Is there demand for those? And will be people printing like the next Tesla car instead of making a clay, just make a giant 3D? Are there giant 3D models being made?
There are 3D printers from like all sizes, from what we make up to house size things. I think you can call them 3D printers, but it's better to think of them in terms of like robotics and industrial automation, because they don't. It's not really similar to using our printer. It's a sort of a specialized thing that you'll design a house to be made with that process.
Got it.
I'm optimistic for that in general. I mean, I see robots and automation changing the way we make everything.
Right.
And I think that's an amazing positive thing.
They're just so ugly looking. Like when you watch this getting made, it's literally just like the slurry of cement going in a circle, and it looks terrible. It's giant, and it looks like it takes, this looks like much more effort to build a prison cell than building something actually that people would want to live in.
You're certainly not going to build a complete structure just by depositing concrete, but that's part of the that could be part of the process.
Could be part of the process.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to build huge walls. Okay, 3D printed the entire way. But that's actually the interesting thing about it, is that it just keeps moving and building and moving and building. So there is this concept like, oh yeah, we just go to the desert and we have these refugees coming across the border and we can make 1,000 houses for them or something. I guess on the inside no, it still looks terrible.
Nice interior decoration.
It looks like they got some cheap IKEA and threw it in there. And if you put some throw pillows, everything looks better with a couple of good throw pillows. But it still looks like a prison cell with throw pillows. Maybe it would work for like a beach hut or something.
There's also other kinds of structures like storage and industrial structures and things like that.
Yeah. I don't want to neg it too much. The founder who made this, I still appreciate the technology and the effort you put into it. I just don't want to live in a...
It is a little frustrating that 3D printing, everyone kind of tries to apply that word to any sort of new fabrication process because it's a better sounding word than like house manufacturing.
House robot, cement robot, bricklayer. And what about this, like, hardware is so hard building a hardware company. You need tons more money. You have to sell it for a high price. Everybody undersells like the actual cost of it. And then the big critique from investors is always, isn't it a race to the bottom? You're going to make this thing and the same factory you build it in is going to build fake ones at night, or they're going to steal your IP, or somebody's going to knock it off and reverse engineer it. How do you protect against that issue? Is that why you make the lasers here in America, so they don't get reverse engineered?
We make the resin here. It's a challenge. Any type of business has to kind of understand what's its advantage, what allows it to charge more money than other people, what is it doing better, and if you can't, if other people have access to those same abilities, then you're going to lose that advantage.
It will be a race to the bottom.
I think that's great that happens, because that means more great things get produced for everybody. Yeah. And what that means for us, if we want to keep having an advantage, we've got to keep moving forward. Yeah. And we've got to keep investing in new technology and constantly be ahead. Fortunately, it's more than just copying the hardware we have, because there's software that drives it. There's the materials that go in it. Even the hardware we have, there's a sort of a whole set of hardware at the factory that calibrates it and measures it to get it to the performance level it's at. And so there's a lot of pieces to copy there, and we're constantly iterating and improving on them. And I think frankly, it's tougher to build a profitable, high margin business in this space than it is in a SaaS or that sort of business. But for me, it's more rewarding. So
yeah, what's the vertical, the holy grail of 3D printing? Like, is there a vertical where people are dreaming in science fiction, back to Prometheus? Like in Prometheus, they're obviously making weapons technology that's biology, and it seems far-fetched, but here we are. People are building heart valves with 3D printers. I think the heart muscle is pretty easy to replicate. It's not like brain cells or something. And then so people are putting 3D kind of, not organs, but pieces of organs, I think is the best way to say it. And they're also talking about 3D printing, fish, and meat, steaks. Is any of that going to happen in our lifetime? Is that the holy grail?
I think, I don't know if there's like one holy grail, because there's so many capabilities. You want to print living tissue, you want to print plastics, you want to print metals. So maybe sort of the general idea of like the holy grail of digital fabrication is getting closer to the point where making hardware is like making software, where you design something digitally, and then with software you press compile, or you build it or publish it, and it's done. That's the working thing, with no steps or time involved. With hardware, there's a lot of work that goes into kind of translating that design to a real thing. And the closer we can get to going from an idea in your head to a design on the screen to a real thing, that will enable enormous progress and all over humanity, all parts of technology, everything that we want. If we can if we can shorten that huge process to go from an idea to a real thing, that is a really powerful idea.
You saw the 3D printing chocolate stuff, and what do you think of that, like 3D printing steak or something eventually? Is that coming or not? Where would you put that, over under? 5, 10, 15 years?
Again, there's a lot of things that are like called 3D printing that just like don't have a lot to do. Making food automatically, making artificial meat without animal products, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. You could call it 3D printing, but it's like we have nothing to do with
my favorite
each other.
Of all of this was when Westworld came on and they showed making the androids, and they're like doing it like with string, and it is kind of 3D print. That felt like a great interpretation of where this could go.
I liked the way they visualized it. It was like a little more in depth and realistic than most of these visualizations in sci-fi are just like literally coming out of goo with like no explanation of what's happening. But they sort of give you some idea that there might be a technology that could do something like that one day.
Yeah, I thought that was the other great interpretation of this from a science film. What's the other great 3D printing from an older science
Star
fiction?
Trek? The Star Trek replicator?
No, much better. The Fifth Element.
Oh, yeah.
Remember the scene where there's only the arm left?
Yeah.
Pull that up, Nicky Poo.
That was actually similar to Westworld. They have these like robots stringing out the...
Yes.
That
was probably the best, because it was like all they had left was the arm, and they 3D print the entire...
Fifth Element is one of my all-time favorite movies.
It's so good.
I mentioned that I've been the Big Lebowski for Halloween. Yeah. Well, I've also been Lilu for Halloween.
Just with tape.
That one.
I want to go as the guy
one.
when she wears just the bands of tape. That's when she. Wait, Lilu is the
Lilu's the lady. Yeah.
Yeah, the orange hair.
Yeah, and she has this like orange V strap dress thing.
Is that on the internet? That picture?
No. It won't.
It's not on the internet. It never will be.
I hope not.
That is an inspired choice. I want to go as the guy who's like, "It's so green! It's so green! Oh my god! What's his name?
Ruby Rod.
Yeah,
Ruby Rod.
Yeah,
it's so green. I love that Ruby Rod
Corbin
character.
Dallas, my man.
What did he say?
Corbin Dallas, my man.
Corbin Dallas, my man. We're here on the outer rim. Wherever they were. It's such a great film. Who is the director of that?
Luc Besson.
Luc Besson. He killed it. I mean, look at this, 3D printing. This was so well done. Here comes the goose slurry from Ohio.
Yeah.
Here is a hand that was controlling like either a weapon or like the speed, and it's building the bone first.
What's nice about this is they're showing multiple processes coming together. This is really how complex things are made by people today. It's not just like one machine that finishes the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, one for the brain, one for the bone material. So well done. And here comes
the meat puller.
The meat puller, which pulls and straps the meat onto the body. For those of you listening, if you haven't seen the scene from The Fifth Element, it's great. Oh, there she is. Oh, maybe that's she's nude there, so that would be a first for This Week in Startups. I'm going to go ahead and say edit that out. And he's about to press the button to destroy it because they can't believe that it's a
human female.
It's a human form. And then the straps come. Here's your straps for your outfit. You can include the straps.
A different one.
It was the orange ones.
Yeah.
When she wears orange. Yeah. Such a great scene from it. It's amazing the world we live in now. Like, we literally live in the future. We're so close with this stuff.
Getting there.
What do you think? How old are you? You're 30? 35? 32? What do you think 50 years from now? You're 82, and you're like the guy, Anthony Hopkins from You're Anthony Hopkins, or you're Huygens.
Why am I Anthony?
You're Huygens. Huygens. What's the guy from Prometheus? Huygens? Huygens.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Wayland.
Wayland, yeah.
Wayland.
Yeah.
Wayland or Wayland? You're like the Wayland guy giving the TED speech, but then at the end of Prometheus, he's like 90 years old and he wants to meet his maker.
Yeah.
When you're that age, you're Anthony Hopkins in Westworld, you're Wayland, you end of your career, 82. What will 3D printing look like? Take a minute to think that through. What will we be 3D printing in 50 effing years? 60 effing years.
I think it's so hard to predict at that
I know,
time
that's
frame.
why it's so interesting. We're here in 2020. Remember, 50 years would be 1970, 60 years would be 1960. What did computers do in 60? What are they doing now in our pockets?
I think most of what we're imagining is really there, like printing, living tissue and creating organs. That's definitely happening. Multi-material printers are assembling parts automatically to get to like completely finished products straight from digital designs, and automation of all these processes. So humans can focus on the most interesting part, which is designing, creating, coming up with the idea.
I'm going to just go ahead and advise you as your counsel here. You do not need to go find the engineers. Nothing good will come from finding the engineers, because the engineers were made by somebody. That's what I really wanted to see in the Prometheus follow-up. They did the Aliens Resurrection or something. It was terrible because he wanted to make like the Prometheus follow-up that would be a science not about the aliens, and they forced him to make it into this hybrid, and it was like you saw it, right?
Yeah. It wasn't as good. Yeah,
it wasn't as good. They should have just gone fully about who made the engineers. The engineers made the aliens. Who made the engineers?
But there were 2 Fassbenders, though, so that might...
Double the Fassbender is never bad. Yeah, I mean, he's not getting an Oscar, but, it's just a little robotic, that performance, we'll be honest. Sorry, apologies to Fassbender and to Ben Horowitz, who we couldn't get to today. Hey, Max, continued success. You're hiring.
Yep. Yeah, we are looking for the engineers, actually.
You're looking for the engineers?
Yeah.
Yeah, the 9-foot-tall ones that are just albino.
I mean, if they're really good engineers, any size and shape,
They can work remote. So whatever galaxy they're in, we have Zoom, we have Slack. You could work remote like the engineers were working.
Jobs@formlabs.com. Please send us a message from whichever planet you're on.
Absolutely. And as we were talking before, that opening sequence of Prometheus, such a good scene.
Yeah.
Where the engineers are drinking that biological device and the body breaks down and he falls into
sacrificing
the water.
Themselves to create life
on Earth.
Yeah.
Such an incredible metaphor. I mean, this is why Ridley Scott's a genius. Blade Runner, Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, and Prometheus. Look at this scene where there's a giant waterfall and there's no life on Earth. And what people don't understand this movie because people are dumb. They aren't paying attention. But you watch these engineers walk to the edge of the cliff, and he takes out his little glass of, goo, which is kind of like a cup of tea. His nano goo. It's like nano goo, right? He's got his little cup, and then it's kind of living. It's like, oh boy, this is the end for me. I'm going to drink it.
Look at the traps on that guy.
I don't know what the story is with that guy, if he's like a real guy. And then the ship leaves, and he is sacrificing his life. His body starts to break down almost immediately, violently. You've never seen this, Nick? No. Producer Nick hasn't seen Prometheus.
Look at his lats on this guy. This dude is diesel.
Well, the reason you have to think that is because he was also made. The engineer was also engineered by somebody. And then through his veins, you can see the goo is turning into life. And then all the DNA strands break down and reconfigure in the ocean at Earth. And then you have to think maybe they already engineered Earth a little bit.
I guess, on the 50-year time frame, the way life makes things by building things bottom up at the molecular level, that's something that humans are not even close to do.
Building from like 3D printing molecules.
Yeah, and making something that is designed the way we want it down to individual molecules. I don't know if that's happening on a 50-year time frame, but I hope so.
That'd be incredible. We would literally be able to just print a new liver or a brain. God forbid you get Alzheimer's or dementia, like one of these horrible things. Can you imagine a brain transplant? Or you drink the goo, or they shoot the goo in your brain and it rebuilds your brain like over time and transfers your memories from your old dying brain into the new refreshed brain.
Sounds like the plot of the next Ridley Scott movie. Yeah.
That's actually a really good one. If you could build a second brain and it would rescaffold your brain and make it like 100 times more powerful. Now you got something to work on. Go raise more money. You should have raised more than $15 million. You could be working on this already.
That's true. I better get back to Boston and get
back to Boston. All right. Hey, thanks for coming out. Thanks for doing the pod. It's fascinating stuff. And keep grinding it out. If you need a job, jobs@formlabs.com. I mean, it's a rocket ship. It's going to go 100x from here. You heard it from me first. And congrats to Mitch Kapor and Freda of Kapor Capital on another huge win. It's another unicorn on their belts. We'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.